Fine day to you all, I'm Kinsmark, and this is Chapter 3 of Let's Play Spellgear. I checked out the open world mode in the last episode, so I'm checking out the competitive modes in this one. I think all I have to do is just click Ready for Battle to actually commence the matchmaking. I don't know exactly how I choose modes, because I can't seem to click on anything here in this Arenas tab, so I assume it'll just auto-match me to some sort of mode? I don't know. I'll find out. Also, as I wait for the matchmaking, that has already taken more than a minute, so I'm starting to feel concerned, I should note that I have a critique about the character gear customization and even just equipping things, because note here in this yellow text, please enter the world to interact with item. I can't even change the potions in my quick bar without entering the world for the actual MMO part of the game. I can't change my equipment. I actually had to enter it just to put on the gloves that I picked up from that quest I did in the last episode, and that, why even have this tab on the menu if all it is for me to just really look at stats and to look at the gear that I have instead of actually doing anything with any of it? I have so much confusion for why on earth one would implement that sort of limitation. Why can't I just change the gear that I can see in my inventory here in my inventory menu? Because this isn't an immersive game at all. It doesn't really sell itself as a clever fantasy world or anything. Like, it's not a simulationist game in which concerns about how realistic it is, about when one could actually have the time or ability or safety to rummage through gear and change things up and all that. This isn't that kind of game. This is a game that has, I'll call it what it is, a token MMO mode meant to grind one up to any sort of competitive advantage one might have against players in the actual mode anyone's really playing this game for, the competitive MOBA PvP modes. So since this is very gamey in its format, and that's not a negative thing, it's just how it's put together, as it isn't a simulationist game, as it isn't really meant to convey anything more than a competitive game system, I cannot for the life of me come up with any reason why this limitation would exist. Because it isn't facilitating any sort of simulationist realism. It's just a limitation meant to consume players' time. Just like this matchmaker. Because I've now ranted about this for a couple of minutes or more, and I don't think I've specified any particular mode here in this arena. So it's not just that there aren't any players in whichever mode I might have selected. No. I think it's having a hard time finding anyone playing any mode at all. And as much of a shame as that is, pardon me, and as much as I can't fault the developers too much for that, because I can't stand the idea of faulting developers of any game for aspects of the experience that players have with it that are completely out of the developer's control. However, as much as the devs can't control players' actions or how many people actually find the game interesting, they can, and this is going to sound more crass and mean-spirited than I mean it, make a more charming game that more players will first click on because they find it even interesting to look at on a Steam description page, and then continue playing once they've started playing it. Because I can't harp enough on how generic this game feels. And I want to like it because it has an interesting art style, it's competently put together, its audio design is alright, I can't say it's all that fantastic, it feels punchy and weighty and like there's actually some impact in even the connection of the spells, much less the melee moves. I like the clanginess of the metal when it comes to guarding and stuff. The character models are alright, the art style is at least interesting to look at, if not particularly stylized or inspired, and the maps are, well, honestly, probably the weakest point because they all seem fairly run-of-the-mill and low poly. Like, one can even see in the thumbnail for this particular place that it looks an awful lot like some of the almost clay sculpture-looking Unity molded landscapes. I don't know if this is actually rendered on the Unity engine, it just looks comparable to it. And so there's an aesthetic competence at play here. There's just a mechanical lack of creativity that could ever set this game apart. And that's sort of a shame, because I actually do like the idea of the concept of this game, that of having an MMO that one is essentially using as a vehicle through which to generate assets to use against other players in a competitive and dedicatedly so PvP mode that, you know, the two modes are complementary. I like that idea. I just don't think they're doing all that much as far as clever implementation of it here. And I'm sure that comes off a little more critical than I mean it to. Like I said, I've played so many games that are like each of the components of this, the MMO and the MOBA component, that the question arises, as it does for any free-to-play game. Why would I want to play this when there are other games that do what this does in a more enjoyable way? That's just something that all creative developers for free-to-play titles have to contend with. And I'm having a hard time coming up with an answer here, especially given that 7 minutes later, the matchmaker can't find anyone for me to fight. That's not a good sign. That's a sign that this game is dead on arrival. And again, I can only fault the developers for that so much. However, as far as product advisory goes, for the audience here, advice is probably don't waste your time, because you're just going to sit here and stare at this like I am the entire time. Alright, I have now sat here for 13 minutes, so I think it's fair to say I can't expect anyone to connect to this matchmaker at all today. So that's sad, because for those that this aesthetic and this style of gameplay could appeal to, that means that a potentially decent game is unusable, because there just aren't any players online for it at any given time. I am curious, and this is actually a question that I have for any commenters that are still watching. Can one check the individual Steam stats for a game as far as concurrent server users at any given time? And is there a graph, like I know there is for the 100 most popular games on Steam, to see when the peak hours are? Because if there is such a feature, I'd find myself quite curious to see this game's graph. And that's also something that I'd like to incorporate into potentially assessing some of the other small community games that come out on Steam and struggle in their early days, so that I could at least cover them during some of their peak hours to see how the at least intended experience plays out. So, since I can't do that here, then sadly this entire episode is sort of mission scrub, because I can't even check out this style of gameplay that I had intended to for this entire episode. So apologies for that. Again, when it comes to the First 15 series, which this is sort of an extension of for my coverage of this game, it's more or less not meant to always deliver as entertaining an episode as possible. It is, however, meant to give as candid and clear a look at the experience players can reasonably expect, or rather more realistically expect, from any given game that I'm covering in the series. And sadly, this is what you're looking at for Spellgear. So stick around for whatever comes next here on the channel. Thank you all kindly for watching. I am Kinsmark here at the Press, and as always, I wish you all good gaming and Godspeed.